Okay. Are we waiting a couple of minutes or am I good to go? All right. What about I give it to 2:01 and then fair's fair.
Sounds good.
Okay.
The video, you click on the I thought, hang on, stop.
Okay. I think we are at time and we are good to begin. Really looking forward to this, and I'm so grateful for all of you who chose to spend a little bit of time this afternoon on our weekends, which I know are precious, but educating ourselves and trying to learn about topics of interest. And I'm grateful to be invited to share on this topic. I did have some other colleagues joining me, but they have been unable to do so. So you'll have to put up with my voice, I'm afraid, for the next hour and a half. But let's see how we can battle through. Hour and a half, I say, but I'm going to stop 15 minutes prior to the end, and then we can kind of address all the questions and comments that have come up during the presentation. So again, really grateful to be here, and let's get started. All right. Just by way of introduction as well, my name is Colette Currin, and I am a clinician at the Bellwood Treatment Centre in Toronto, Ontario, and I also work as the National Director for military members, veterans, and first responders for our string of inpatient networks, as well as our outpatient programming across EHN Canada. So I have the two hats that I wear. I'm very passionate about all things to do with recovery, being in long-term recovery myself for the past 27 years, taking it one day at a time, and trying to figure out, like, I think we teach what we most need to learn. And so trying to figure this out for myself and my own journey, and certainly for those of all my clients, whether in my private practice or together with EHN Canada. All right, so today we are hoping to cover in this session, talking a bit about codependence. I don't know if you guys agree with me, but codependence almost has become a bit of a dirty word, in that it has perhaps been misused or maligned. But let's look at that. Let's look at what it actually stands for. Let's look at this concept of prodependence that is being put forward by Dr. Wise. We're going to talk a little bit about self-care, and then hopefully we will also get down to kind of some practicalities when we look at boundaries. Exactly what are healthy boundaries, and how do we go about boundary setting, since we know that it's important, and then we'll leave some time at the end. Okay, so hopefully we'll get through all of that, and that's what our time together looks like. So what exactly is this concept of codependence that we hear bandied about? I mean, I think we need to start off with recognizing that it has never been formally diagnosed as a condition, not in any of the diagnostic and statistical manuals, even the 5th edition. So there's that. And also there have been many adaptations of what the term codependency means since its progenitors. And we're talking about Claudia Black, Robin Norwood, Melody Beattie, having coined the phrase, and having done a lot of work in family systems, and recognized that family members too perhaps play some kind of a role, which you'd have no argument with me with regard to that. But perhaps how we discuss and define that role is something that we need to consider today. often loved ones are being asked to look at how they have a relationship together with addicts in their lives, which is where this phrase was initially coined. But it's done in such a way that it's exploring and cross-questioning in a way their motivations as well as their history, which is often a failed history by the time they come to us for some help, or they are putting up their hands when their loved ones are in treatment, and trying to figure out how they might assist. And so often this idea of codependency has left many family members feeling alienated, and as though their attempts have been somewhat dismissed in terms of being unsuccessful. And these exhausted clients who often come to us in a time of crisis, then we have the danger of them walking away from treatment when they need it most, because honestly the glass is full, and there's no room for one more drop. And when we kind of add to the burden of that, where we are trying to assign responsibility for the role that they may have played or not have played in somebody suffering from an addictions journey, it's kind of more that they can take or have the bandwidth for. So let's look at how it's been defined. Codependence is seen. We look here at Claudia Black, who's worked a lot with family systems, published many books on the matter, and so on, and defines it as an emotional condition in which individuals frequently ignore their own needs while constantly fulfilling the needs of others. It's a learned behavior that develops and breeds, if you like, in the system of dysfunctional relationship patterns, and very often related to a loved one's substance abuse. Individuals that are seen as being at risk of developing codependency as a trait, as a learning condition, have often suffered some kind of trauma themselves, and therefore it's kind of along the lines of when we look at PTSD amongst military and veterans. And we recognize that as an operational stress injury as the result of the job that they do. We see that underlying that there's often this inherent vulnerability due to some predisposing trauma. And so there's kind of this assumption that this vulnerability is inherent in those that are more prone to developing the learned behaviors of codependence. We look at Melody Beattie. I don't know if anybody working in this field has not come across her book, Codependent No More, at some points in their counseling or clinical practice. And some of the characteristics that Melody puts forward are caretaking of others. So if you believe in imago therapy, that we are attracted to the image of our initial caregivers, and we seek that in ongoing relationships that we have in the present in order to resolve some of those long-standing issues. Is this what predisposes me to have a kind of a caretaking bent? People with low self-worth, so kind of like an automatic sense that my needs are not necessarily that important and I can override them at my own expense, no worries there. There's repression, therefore, of some of the needs that I might have or that might arise in the relationship between me and the loved one. Obsessive controlling. In Al-Anon, it's referred to often as the 3 C's, attempts to control, change, and cure the other person. Denial, really, of there being any problem to do with the patterns of behavior as they are at the moment. Perhaps even sometimes denial of how serious the condition is for the loved one. And when we see that kind of denial, we see the behavior where you start kind of covering up, phoning the boss, making excuses to friends, family, employers with regard to the loved one's behavior. There is a dependency, so there's kind of this need to be playing a role in relation to the other person not doing so well. That's a tricky territory, because it's the idea that often we see when people are in recovery and they return to the family system, that when they no longer need that kind of babysitting or hand holding, that this leaves the codependent loved one, kind of floundering as like, what is I now need to redefine my role, because I see kind of my purpose as being quite dependent on having to use my strengths to try and accommodate for what might be lacking in the other person's sense of responsibility. Poor communication, which I suppose goes without saying if one feels that one is ignoring or repressing one's own needs, never mind actually putting them on the table and talking about them. And we're going to come back to that when we look at boundaries and how do we set some boundaries with other people. What are some ideas on how we might go about communicating effectively with regard to our needs? Weak boundaries, weak or loose boundaries or non-existent boundaries, rigid boundaries, a problem with boundaries, essentially, and a lack of trust in the relationship. So some of the characteristics that have been put forward, and then we also look here at Pia Melody, another great contributor to this idea of codependence, and she talks about 5 core symptoms, really help to kind of diagnose the loved one who has a condition of codependency, and these being seen as difficulty expressing appropriate levels of self-esteem. So it starts right from the get-go with the idea of my own self, and recognition of my right to my own needs as well within any given relationship. Difficulty setting functional boundaries, obviously, if I don't even really have a sense of my own needs being important. A difficulty owning our own reality, difficulty acknowledging or meeting our own needs, and interdependent in many ways on others. And core symptom number 5, difficulty experiencing and expressing our reality moderately. So I think fairly safe to say that as one lives in what becomes defined as a codependent relationship, that there can be frustration that eventually boils over at some point because of the role, even if that's self-assigned, that the person is playing in the relationship. All right. So this is our understanding of codependence in a relationship and what somebody who would define themselves by that condition would look like. Now we come to this new idea of prodependence, which is, I think, something that I'd like to see used more often. It's been put forward by Dr. Robert Wise, and he sees this as a new concept in addiction healthcare, which is not so much based on trauma theory, as we see with codependency, but attachment theory, based on the idea that in our world, we need to be able to engage in healthful interdependency. And we hear about this idea of, these dependence and then there's independence. But what about the idea that we do live connected to others? In fact, as we reclaim our connection to ourselves, we also, in healthy recovery, start to reclaim our connection to others and recognize we certainly see in any recovery this idea that social communities and social supports are imperative in recovery, that the idea that I should be trying to cope with these conditions, either trying to assist a loved one and support them in some way or suffering from the condition myself, is that we are in relationship with each other, and that our support for each other as peers that might be suffering from the same condition, and as understanding that I'm not alone, that other people have walked this road before, and so on, is really integral. When I isolate myself, the disease of isolation, and disconnect myself from healthy, independent relationships with others, then I've really only got this guy chatting to me about what is best, advising me, and often doing that according to some long-held talk tracks, right, about what works, and trapping me in that kind of insanity where I'm doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. And so, I think we can all understand this idea that I do want to be connected to others. And this is therefore something that I need to look at navigating in a way that's healthy to me, as opposed to creating some kind of a rigid distance between myself and others, or really kind of cutting ties and absolving myself of any responsibility, and to engage in supportive in a supportive manner with those that I care about. So it's seen that one person's strengths would support the vulnerabilities of another, and vice versa. Strength-based theories are really important to me. And when we look at those, I used to work in the business world. And, we used to have the Myers-Briggs personality inventories. And what I find and what I found when I was building teams of people is this idea of recognizing other people's strengths. So strengthfinder.com, or however one, uses resources to do that, is to recognize that we have ways that we will respond that come so easily to us, that if somebody compliments you on, like, wow, it was incredible, Colette, how you had your whole presentation, prepared a week before the time, you'd already rehearsed it, you'd circulated it around for input. Not my strength. Finalizing the presentation 2 minutes before I jump into the session, that's kind of more my style. And it might be because the idea that I get energized from when I communicate with others, and things come to me, and I can do it with a little more looseness and on the fly, because that comes more naturally to me. And for somebody else, that might just be the most stressful way of doing things. So as we start to recognize relationships, what's important in that too, in any client's journey, in any family member's journey, is recognizing what our natural strengths are. And then we start to work with those. We start to point them, though, in a different direction. And often they're pointed in ways that can be very self-destructive for us, or they really get stuck. But we use those same strengths, and we now point them in a good direction. And so this idea of codependence is recognizing that people are endeavoring to help others, that it's normal and it's healthy to do that, to wish to remain connected to somebody, even if they're failing and struggling. And we're all finding ourselves in kind of extraordinarily difficult circumstances, that the loved one is as baffled by this cunning and powerful condition that seems to be robbing them of their free will and their motivation to choose more healthy behaviors. And, that we can feel some empathy and compassion for that, as well as for ourselves, as we continue to try to engage with them, support them, and make sense of the behavior that is starting to really take root within the system. Very important to recognize that there's no shame or blame, there's no sense of being wrong, and there's no language that kind of pathologizes the care attempts that the loved one has been making while they deal with these extraordinary circumstances and constantly reset their boundaries and engage in behavior that they would never have believed themselves capable of as they, attempt to figure it out on the fly at the same time. So there is very much a recognition for effort given, and there is a sense of hope, so solution focused, as well as useful instruction for the whole family about, okay, so if things aren't working, how do we not pathologize that and see it as a kind of a trauma-informed behavior that I am doomed to repeat, that there can be useful instruction to do something different. All right. So just really quickly, side by side, then we talked about codependency, prodependency. How are these traits, when they measured up next to each other, seen as different? Codependent, looking at that being enmeshed. Prodependent is to say I'm deeply involved with this person. Codependent, I'm externally focused. And prodependency says I'm concerned about the welfare of others. So there is obviously something happening with them, and it is normal for me to want to respond in a way that, if there is a way that I can support them, that I do so. Codependency enabling. So often I hear family members say, "Oh, please don't use the E word," when it comes to something that they might have tried to do in an attempt to cope with somebody, and as somebody dealing with addictions behavior, and instead it's seen as supporting. And perhaps there are different ways we can look at supporting, but nevertheless, it is an attempt to support. Codependent fearful versus concerned, codependent lacking healthy boundaries versus eager to care for a loved one. Perhaps I need learning around what those boundaries are, but it is still, again, my eagerness to care. Codependent just can't say no versus prodependency. I choose in this situation to say yes. When we come to look at boundaries a little more closely, I think it's really important that we understand that what is a boundary for one person is not necessarily an appropriate boundary for another. And so everybody's different, everybody's situation is different, and I may choose to say yes where you might find that's a limit situation for you, where you would choose to say no. Some more we have here is codependency seen as living in denial about the real problem, and prodependency unwilling to give up on loved ones. Angry in codependency versus, this idea wherever there is anger, there is fear underneath. So it's understanding that there is fear around any further loss, including loss of control. Codependent controlling. Prodependency is an attempt of trying to be heard. Fearful concerned. We have hypervigilant versus anticipating problems. So where's the line between just constantly being so focused and reactive to what the loved one is doing versus a normal behavior that says I'm anticipating that this event that we may be going to, or this situation might be difficult for the loved one, or it might be difficult for me. And so that's okay for me to sort of kind of be thinking ahead, and that might be based on kind of playing the tape forward as to how things have happened before, and how do I use that in ways that can be helpful. Obsessed with the addiction in codependency versus prodependency is determined to protect the addict and also the family that has been impacted by this situation. So when we look at prodependent treatment, then, so we say, okay, if we see those as those are kind of the differences. I understand for a lot of people, when you first look at those, they can appear very nuanced, but this languaging being something that is really important, and we say, all right, so how would we deal in terms of treatment? How would we look at a situation where we are trying to work with loved ones of addicts? First of all, we would begin, as we do with any good clinical practice, by assessing for mental health pathology, mood disorders, and so on. So it begins by using standard measures, if need be, but to really understand, is it perhaps my own, have I got an anxiety disorder of sorts that is driving my behavior in this way, in which case, then I need to look at dealing with that first, because perhaps I'm catastrophizing and awfulizing the situation because it relates to underlying anxiety of my own that I need to control. So let's begin by really understanding the biopsychosocial profile of everybody that sits in front of us. We also look at validating and celebrating any prior attempts to rescue, save, heal, and otherwise help. This validation, is really important. It's important when we look at how we raise our children. to recognize that, where this intention came from, and where things have worked out well, because perhaps there's something in that we can learn from and we can expand upon. So very much working in that spirit, educating as well about the nature of addiction, and understanding the stress that it can place on loved ones. That stress might then be related to just, expectations. I love using the expression, like, an expectation is a premeditated resentment. So perhaps I'm coming in with an expectation. My loved one comes back from treatment and they relapse. And this is the end of the world for me, because all that money, I thought everything was going well, and now everything has fallen apart. It's the end of the world. If I get educated about the condition, perhaps it will lead me to understand that sometimes relapse can be a part of the journey. And that therefore, how do I deal with that differently in terms of how it impacts me, and in terms of how I'm communicating with a loved one with regard to the fact that they relapsed? This is really important, right? The education piece around understanding this cunning, baffling, powerful condition. Providing ongoing support and encourage group support. So, when we recognize that a family member is dealing with a really tough situation, they are looking for supports in their lives. We've already talked about the idea that when I join a community of people, I no longer feel alone. I don't feel like I'm going crazy. Sometimes we can even laugh our heads off about some of the things that we've been doing to cope and so on. But I go and I find my own support in relation to these conditions. We identify times and situations where loved one's actions have led to a less than preferable outcome, and then we redirect toward more effective assistance. So when we've created an atmosphere where somebody can share about their attempts honestly, without having, fear of having to deal with shame and blame about what they've done, then we're encouraging them to open up about things that might not be working. And now we can tackle that in the spirit of, what about if we try something different? Or what can we learn, just as the client may learn from relapse, about these ideas of what might be the most effective behavior. And also, once one decides that they want to engage in those kinds of behaviors because they would be more helpful instead, is that if there is a lapse in being able to apply the new behavior consistently, that we need to be supportive, right? Again, this idea of support, ongoing support, being really important in codependency. So we work to improve the client's efforts at their relationship and communication styles that they have with loved ones, and also, most importantly, in terms of their relationship that they have with themselves, and how they might engage in more self-care and so on, which is why the idea of self-care and self-compassion and boundaries is all wound up in this session on codependency. If, what sometimes happens is, even if we've done an assessment at the beginning of the relationship, if, as often happens, a client gets to a point to recognize, wow, now that I'm not so focused on the other person's journey and trying to control that and fix that all the time, I get to focus a little on me. I get to engage in self-care, and perhaps I also get to see, some of my own deep-seated core beliefs. Maybe they could do with some rewiring and resetting. Perhaps the software here is not being entirely helpful to me. Perhaps I need some help with emotion regulation because I'm having a very explosive reaction to this. Is it just in relation to the situation, or is it because there is a lot of anger inside of me that might be not so much related to this, but circumstances experiences from the past. First, we need to deal with the situation that might drive a client in or a family member in to seek insight, education, help, understanding. And then further on in that journey, they might want to look at exploring that a little deeper themselves. Okay. Where I can't help but talk about, when I look at what Dr. Wise put forward as codependency and the way that treatment works and the way that attempts to help the others are viewed, this paradigm shift that happens. I really wanted to just throw in a couple of slides here. I don't know if anybody's heard of Krista Tippett. But I was attending a Tara Brach seminar a little while ago, and she had her on as a speaker, and I was so delighted to discover her. It led me to read more about her On Being project. I've got a slide here with resources afterwards for anyone who'd like to explore her, her work further. But Krista Tippett talks about grounding virtues that are really important, like as we try to effect change in society with regard to systemic racism, or as we deal with personal issues or family issues, whatever it is, that we need to pay attention to grounding virtues that will facilitate the process. And so I really wanted to share those with you as well, because I just feel when we look at the spirit of codependence, these grounding virtues are really what they're all about. And that is looking at words that we use, like being careful. And so perhaps those are the words where the idea of codependency, if that's become a negative word with a lot of negative connotations, is it helpful for us to put that forward? Or how can we best talk to things that are going on? She actually talks about words that shimmer. That if we can start using language that is imbued with encouragement and kindness and support and so on, that it's really important on how that lands with people. She talks about hospitality as well, which is more than an invitation. Come, let's sit down, so you can have a conversation with me. It's also it's not just the place. That here I am, I've bookmarked a place for us to have conversation. It's the atmosphere of the space that I provide for this conversation to ensue. And that's really important, right? When we're kind of, let's sit down and talk about this, if we can do that in such a way that somebody feels like I'm snuggling up into a beanbag, or, like this is comfortable. I know that when this happens, nobody is going to be downtrodden. This is not going to spoil into arguments, but this is us truly trying to constructively sit down together and address something important. Generous listening. So, of course, generous listening ties into that as well. And it's not just us being present. It's about us truly leaning in to be genuinely curious about the other person's point of view, because I think I know your point of view is that, there's something wrong with you, or you're weak, or you're misguided, or you're being influenced by your friends, or whatever it is I think I know. There has to be a kind of a vulnerability in me that says that even though I think I know better, it's so obvious that I'm the sane one in this equation, that I need to be prepared to be surprised or delighted by something that I learn from the other person. And that can't happen unless I am prepared to engage in generous listening. The other virtues that she goes on to talk about are adventurous civility. So this sentence I stole directly from Krista Tippett is the idea that it honors the difficulty and complexity of the intimate and civilizational questions that perplex and divide us. What a beautiful way to put that, right? Is that we come to the conversation with this idea of adventurous civility, that these situations are complex and they are tearing us apart. And there are so many intimate factors involved. You're a human being. I can't possibly know what it feels like to live your life or to walk a mile in your shoes, unless I'm absolutely you. And so I come to the conversation with this civility and respect inherent in what we're trying to achieve. Humility again is another one of those concepts that can be so misconstrued as humility, humiliation. We learn in the 12-step model, it's often through repeated humiliations that we learn something about humility. But humility again is I like the expression being just right size, right? Where I stand shoulder to shoulder with everybody else. Like I am no better than they are, but I'm no less than they are either. Just because I'm struggling with a certain condition doesn't make me worth any less. And so humility is not us trying to make ourselves small, but it's about us trying to encouraging others to be big. Right? Is encouraging others that their ideas can be just as important as mine. And I often find that I'm really drawn to amazing speakers, leaders, motivators who are so learned in their area of specialty, and you can see that they stand, firmly planted in the ground of their own knowledge and expertise, and it's incredible. It's inspiring, right? And yet they also have this quality where they are open to having that completely challenged, to walk away with perhaps a question mark over something that they felt quite certain about, or the desire to explore a little more, an insight that was provided by somebody who raised a hand and asked a question. So that balance between, I of course need to have some conviction around what I believe, especially as clinicians, where we take research-based ideas and we say, with this population, it's going to help them with challenging core beliefs, and research will show that to us, and we apply it, and then we test it, and we see, oh, good, it proves to be true. It's evidence-based practice, and so on. And yet we need constantly to be open to the idea that things evolve, and that while we might recognize that we're trying to coin this phrase of codependency, is there a better way to put that? And did anybody ever gain anything from walking away, feeling less than, feeling hopeless, and unworthy because of what they've tried to now? Right? We all get up in the morning and we're trying to do the best thing that we can, and it's really recognizing that we need to believe that about others. And so we know what we know, but we evolve and we change and we learn. And nowhere have I seen that as in this field of addiction, where we talked about abstinence as the only goal. I've come to understand that abstinence is not the definition of recovery. Recovery is when I recover all of me, my true self, my real strengths, and my main purpose. And I get to start to live aligned, to those values. That's actually what recovery is about. We learn about harm reduction because we see the kinds of drugs and behaviors that people engage in. Social media, just for starters. You should see me watching Netflix in the evening and falling asleep, on the couch every night as a way to unwind, and then wondering why I don't do something more purposeful like reading a book. We engage in these behaviors all the time. So can we take the blinkers off, and can we look at harm reduction approaches, and just at least be curious about what's going on that we haven't got the energy to deal with right now, and so on and so on. And patience, lastly. Patience is really important too. And I think patience is key because as a clinician, we engage in short-term therapies, cognitive behavior therapies. I'm a SMART facilitator. We talk about, we're going to teach you some tools and tricks, and those things are going to work. But we also know that we might have within us ways of believing, things we believe about ourselves, others, and the world that are so deep-seated and long-standing that they will take time to undo. We look at issues in society that just, that break our hearts, right? And we want to go around and we want to issue laws and edicts about how people should behave and what they should do, and how, whether it's the pandemic and keeping each other safe, never mind all the Black Lives Matters, the indigenous situations that break our hearts. And we also understand that social transformation takes time, and that social transformation begins with human transformation. This idea, it always reminds me of a story I heard about a guy walking along a beach, and all these starfish had been washed up on the beach, and of course they just way away from the water and the tide, and he was walking along kind of patiently, bending down, picking up a starfish and flinging it back into the ocean, and there was just hundreds, if not thousands, of these starfish on the beach. And somebody walked up to him and said, like, honestly, I don't know, like how you think you're going to make a difference here. Like, there's just so many, and there's like one of you trying to fix this situation. And the guy just smiled, bent down, picked up another starfish, threw it into the ocean, and said, well, it made a difference for that one. And we begin, and this is how we do it. It's this idea of, how do we eat an elephant, one bite at a time. But it begins with us, and it begins with us opening ourselves up to inquiry and question, and our own sense of what is important with regard to how we treat others, ourselves, the planet. And so the social transformation, it takes longer, way longer than any of us are happy with. But it begins from within, and we have to have the patience to acknowledge that. All right. I just want to make sure I am doing okay on time. So we've looked at these concepts of how, when addiction is within the system, and somebody is battling, and family members are battling to cope, and they're doing the best that they can, that we need to acknowledge that, respect that, support that, and be present in a way that helps them not to turn away from us and feel more despair, but to be a part of their journey. We begin, though, to help all members to understand this idea of self-compassion and self-care, right? When we do that, people who extend themselves too much and leave nothing for themselves, they may end up feeling really irritable and resentful. We don't have endless reserves, always. And I think particularly as clinicians, for any of us who have lived experience, I remember when I went to go and work in the field, initially I was in recovery, I was working in a completely different world, and I was reluctant to go into working in this full time. Would this be just too much, like living in the problem and being steeped in it, all the time? My only regret is that I didn't come to it sooner. But I also recognize that as I care so passionately about others, and I turn up for them, and my heart aches for them, make no mistake, these are relationships between human beings. And so, of course, we are affected by the pain that we encounter in others. I recognize, all the more importantly, the need that I need to keep, filling my well. Right? I need to keep up with my recovery work, with my mindfulness practice, with my connection to others, with walking on the Bruce Trail, right? Because I connect with nature, and that makes me feel sane. That's my nature, is my cathedral. But I recognize, that I need to really take care of myself as well. Oops, I think I jumped forward. And that's self-compassion. Right? That's caring about the fact that I might get tapped out, that this might be very draining on me. And so how do I take care of me? If we don't believe that we're worth it, then we recognize that there is work to be done. There, again, coming back to this idea of being just right size, right? This we'll talk about a little bit more when we come to boundaries, the idea that I need to understand that I'm worth caring for in this relationship, because it doesn't look as though I'm the one with the problem, or I'm the one that is suffering the most. And people who practice self-compassion are more likely to practice self-care in terms of their emotional needs, their physical needs, their social needs, their spiritual needs, because as we become more mindful, mindfulness is very important in self-compassion, we start to notice what might be missing. or what we need to let go of because we're carrying too much or carrying the wrong things. Asking for help and setting boundaries, therefore, are very important ways that we need to learn to care for ourselves. This, of course, makes me think of the ideas put forward by Kristen Neff, who has written so many books about self-compassion and the importance of self-compassion. And, she talks about it as consisting of 3 elements. The first of those being mindfulness, right? As I turn toward what is happening right now, and I recognize that this is a moment of difficulty. So there's no avoidance, and all the different ways that I might try to avoid situations by, catastrophizing, globalizing, numbing out myself, perhaps with substances, getting really angry, and so on, is can I take a seat? And can I be present for the feelings that are arising within me and accepting that they are here, that I can't say that I'm not having them, that I wish that I wasn't, that I was better than that, but I mindfully become very aware of what is going on for me in this particular situation. And then there needs to be, it's like the 2-winged bird, right? The idea that I balance that with self-kindness. So being warm and understanding toward our suffering, our failures, or our feelings of inadequacy. So I first turn up and I honor mindfully what it is that I'm feeling. This really sucks. This hurts. This is difficult. And then with self-kindness, I am able to look at myself experiencing that feeling, and I can feel for myself that I wish it was different, that I wish the situation wasn't so. It's the yin and yang of change, right? Accepting what is and wanting to motivate to make it different, to make it not so. So can I view that with kindness? Can I see that where I am failing or I'm feeling inadequate, that there is the desire inside of myself, the experience of what's going on, for that to be different, for me to be able to handle that perhaps in a different way, that this situation is somehow might not be so. And then the third element in self-compassion is always this idea of common humanity. I'm not the only one who's battling with this. I'm not alone. We recognize sufferings, feelings of personal inadequacy are part of the shared human experience. And really, it's that common humanity that helps us not to beat up on ourselves, right? We don't want to sit in mindfulness with too much complacency, and we don't, want to be angry and beat up on ourselves in that need for change as well. Again, we recognize these to be human problems that not only ourselves are dealing with when it comes to self-compassion. These elements are so important. Back to Robert Wise for a moment, because when he introduces this idea of codependency, he recognizes the difficulty of boundaries. So we're going to go on to talk a little bit about how we might set boundaries in a minute. But loved ones of addicts find themselves doing one or more of the following. So, we'll recognize these. It's focusing more on the problems of the addict than on my own problems, or things that are going on for me. Taking care of things that are the addict's responsibility, not theirs. Doing things they don't want to do because they feel like they have no choice. They're desperate. I'm going to have to lend her some money because, if I don't, I'm afraid of what she's going to do in order to get money to spend on drugs. And so, I don't want to do this, but I've got no choice. I'm just going to have to continue to behave in the same manner because somehow that's going to, give me control over something worse happening in the situation. Potentially might be my talk track, right? Meeting the addict's needs without the addict asking for help. So sometimes we're so busy trying to over accommodate that the addict hasn't even asked for help. But we're feeling this compulsion to want to do something in that particular situation. Forcing their assistance on the addict even when that assistance is not wanted. So sometimes it's even, really forcing it down their throat. Becoming indispensable to the addict as a way of keeping the addict close. Trying to control the addict's behavior as a way of keeping the addict safe. So this is when we notice that boundaries really start to fall apart. Okay, so we're gonna take a look at boundaries now more specifically. Hopefully everybody is still doing okay. I know it's a lot sitting for a long time in these sessions. I know I sometimes have to put my camera off and I have to do a few jumping jacks or stretch and move around. So let's take a look at boundaries and how we might set a bit of a roadmap for those. I like, there's a poem by Robert Frost called The Mending Wall, and there's a sentence in that poem that says, good fences make good neighbors. When I think of boundaries, I always think of it in terms of a fence. This idea that we are living companionably alongside each other. So we are in relationship with each other, and we are trying to figure out where I end and you begin. And so when we have a fence, then I know not to kind of set up my barbecue in your garden because, my garden is on this, like we respect each other's integrity, and I know what's yours and I know what's mine because there is a boundary between us, and the boundary is there to facilitate a harmonious relationship. Right. So the boundary's purpose is not to, sever relationships between the two of us, but to facilitate them so that we are not inadvertently trampling over each other. All right. So that's the purpose of a boundary. We get different types of boundaries, and really quickly to summarize that is unhealthy and healthy. Unhealthy boundaries are where they might be non-existent or extremely limited. So, we teach others how to treat us. They can do whatever they like. They can come and go as they please. There's really no rules of engagement. My needs certainly haven't been put forward. And so people wander in and out. I feel exhausted. I feel depleted. I feel completely used. But that's because I really don't even have any boundaries in place. When we look at loose or porous boundaries, the idea is that the boundaries are there, but then I'll change my mind and say, fine, I'll lend you the money, or all right, this time, and so on and so on. So this is actually even more confusing because I get resentful and upset when you're not respecting my boundaries because they are there. It's not like they're non-existent, but the fact is they're there, then they're not there. Then so like this, and so eventually people don't take them seriously because they just don't stick. The opposite of that, though, is when we have such rigid boundaries that really we've now built a cement wall, between ourselves and our neighbors, and we want nothing to do with each other. So they're so rigid that they actually don't facilitate, like a relationship between the two of us that allows us to interact with each other, to accommodate each other, to be in each other's lives in a way that is meaningful and beneficial and enjoyable for both of us. Healthy boundaries are when obviously just the opposite of that. The boundary is there and it's very much understood between both people. However, it's flexible. Right? As I understand, there's a particular circumstance happening. Maybe you're going to have, your niece's birthday party in your backyard. And so there's a situation happening, and of course I can accommodate that. I wouldn't necessarily want to accommodate it all the time, but it makes sense in this particular situation. So it's like the point is we're trying to have an amenable relationship with each other, and the boundary is helping us to do so. And these boundaries leave both people feeling safe and protected from any kind of abuse or manipulation by the other, right? So the boundary has got that, it serves the purpose of making us both feel safe, and it allows us both to feel connected, again, because of course that's the purpose. I was reading this book by Glennon Doyle called Untamed. I don't know if anybody's heard of Glennon Doyle. She wrote Love Warrior. She's written a couple of books. But this paragraph really jumped out at me when I read this, and I wanted to share that today as well, which is a boundary is the edge of one of our root beliefs about ourselves and the world. We are like computers, and our beliefs are software with which we've been programmed. They control our decisions, perspectives, feelings, and interactions. So they determine our destiny. There is nothing more important than unearthing what we really believe to be true about ourselves and our world. Really great to understand that at the end of the day, this business about boundaries, or what is appropriate for me and what is appropriate for you, is really about some stuff that I've come to believe. And it can be about the world in general, about you in particular, or about this disease or condition. And if I just let that software run rampant, controlling my destiny, because I believe everything in there to be true, that could be a dangerous situation. And so this comes back to the humility to engage in conversation where perhaps I can understand a different perspective, or I can see why for you, you're adopting a coping mechanism, which I see as highly destructive, but that you are so terrified of letting go of, because otherwise you literally feel that your world will fall apart, or that you will be unable to bear the pain of something that you are grappling with, things that I may not know. Okay, so we now see in our relationships with others, this business of boundary setting is really key. It relates to our ability to self-care, to have self-compassion, and to deal in relationships with others with integrity and respect. So how do I set a boundary? All right, so we've got a little roadmap here. The first point relates to that idea of self-worth that we talked about, right? Mary Oliver, I think it was, right, who has that quote about what is it that you plan to do with this one wild and precious life? That's it. We have each been given our 5 minutes on the stage, and then it's gone. And I don't know, I'm sure like a lot of you, this past year and a half has been really difficult. I recently lost somebody really close to me to COVID back home in South Africa, where they have a 2% vaccination rate because they can't get vaccines, and they died. And there is such a reminder when those close to us pass, that we're all headed eventually to the same place. We don't know where, we don't know when, but we know how this all ends. And when we get a wake-up call that says, what am I planning to do with this time? And do I recognize the gift of my one wild and precious life, and that I have the fundamental right to live it to the very best of my abilities, to feel the sense of joy and freedom and enthusiasm that I deserve, that every human being deserves. Because often when we are involved with something like addiction, and we have become very concerned about and focused on the needs of others, we lose ourselves in the process, and we completely forget that there are two people here, and I'm one of them, and I too have a right to a good night's sleep, to turn up for my job in the morning feeling refreshed, or with a sense of clarity and purpose, to live out my goals, to have hobbies and interests of my own that I can enjoy unfettered by this kind of anxiety that is gnawing at me all the time. And so for a lot of people, it's a really big leap of faith to realize that we can't even begin this business of boundary setting. Let's proceed no further, right? Unless you are prepared to recognize how important it is for you to recover the knowing of that. Because it's only when we know that this is true, life is brief, life is precious, and I deserve to live it to the best of my own potential, that I would be prepared to do then what I need to do to ensure that that can come into play. All right. So the next step then is to identify our emotions. I always say to clients, when I'm dealing with them, remember, feelings are flags. Your feelings are telling you that they've sent up a flare, something's going on, and we need to pay attention to it. So this ABCDE, by the way, I stole from Smart Recovery, and it's just such a great acronym. If we remember nothing else about rational emotive behavior therapy, which is the mother of cognitive behavior therapy, then, we kind of walk away remembering this. Rational, how I think; emotive will affect how I feel, will affect how I behave. Therefore, if I change my thoughts, I change my life. If I change the software in my brain, then I change my destiny, right? So that is how important it is for me to engage in enough mindfulness to know what is going on, that I undergo this paradigm shift where I'm a little less focused on controlling what's going on out there, and I switch it to understanding what's going on in here, right? From controlling things out there to understanding things in here. So I might have a feeling. I always say to clients, we start usually with the C, the consequences. Like, I'm so angry that I can't even sleep. I can't think straight. I can't do my job. I can't function on anything. And then we look at the activator. We say, what happened? Like, what triggered this feeling inside of you? It's not just the activator, though. It's the belief about the activator. Right? Somebody cuts me off in traffic and I get out of my car, I march up to the person's window, I scream and shout, like, how dare they? Do they know how long I've been sitting in this lineup, and what gives them the right to think they're more important, because people are always just trying to take advantage of others, and they don't respect it, blah, 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 blah. These are my beliefs about the situation that are leading to my feelings and my reactions, right, and my behaviors in the situation. You might be sitting in the same lineup and somebody cuts in front of you and you're like, honestly, I'm not even in a rush. The guys are obviously got to be somewhere in a hurry. Maybe they've got a kid in the back of the car. They're trying to get them to the hospital. I have no idea what's going on, but honestly, it's no skin off my nose if they go in front of me. I've done that to people before, and I've been in those situations. I have a very different reaction, right? So it's not what happens, it's what we think about what happens. So whenever we want to engage in this business of boundary setting, we've got to investigate, dispute. The D is to dispute and to challenge, like the thought process. Everybody is always trying to take advantage. The moment I'm saying everybody and always and words like that, it's usually a clue that I'm polarized thinking, black and white, catastrophizing, awfulizing, and that my thinking could probably stand to come a little closer to the middle. And so I go, is it true that everybody's always trying to, just the other day, I was trying to get things ready for a session, and, the IT guys responded to my frantic text and ran in and, helped me to pull it off last minute. So, I mean, I don't think everybody's always just trying to be mean and take it, but not everybody in the world. Like, why, do I believe, that what sort of a belief is that I'm walking around with? So is it true? Is it absolutely true? Who would I be if I didn't have that thought? Like, how might I be different in this situation if I wasn't walking around with that thought? And how does this thought serve me? Like, how does this thought make my world a better place if I hold on to this one, right? And that's essentially Byron Katie's 4 questions, if I have them right. It doesn't matter, though, how you dispute your beliefs. It matters that you do, right? And that you check in on your thinking, particularly if you are having a consequent reaction, that is to be enraged and upset and, so on, that we can at least just see what's fueling that. We have to unearth and break down over time our existing core beliefs in order to get more effective beliefs to take their place. That's really important, because I think I've been around long enough that they had those books, The Power of Positive Thinking. I've certainly worked with affirmations in my life. There's nothing wrong with them. But the fact is that I can try to stick affirmations, over the top of these like rock solid existing beliefs as long as I like, but I'm not removing them. I am not having them stand up to inquiry, and so that I can dissolve them. I can slowly break them down over time so that they don't guide, the software in my mind. So it's not just a matter of thinking more positive, more effective beliefs. It's a matter of unearthing and breaking down the existing, potentially irrational beliefs that we might have as well. So I do all this business and work. Now we can see why boundary setting is not as simple as it may sound. A lot of work to do. I do the work of figuring out my reactions and responses to things, and I try to see what's driving that. And if it comes up, trumps that, yeah, This is definitely rational. This is a belief that I believe this is how I need to be living in my home. And I'm no longer prepared to put up with things breaking and people shouting and screaming at each other. This is my home, and this is a limit situation for me. I've checked in on my thinking. I find it to be quite rational, and I find it to be necessary for me to put a limit around that, because that's important to me and that's a need of mine. So once I have checked out on my thinking, I now am able to set limits about what is acceptable for me and what is no longer okay and non-negotiable. All right, it's not negotiable. I can't enforce my necessary limits on other people unless I've really reached the point that for me, I'm not prepared to go on with them. They're non-negotiables. This is really important because I think often we give other people advice. We always say when we're doing these community support groups, like no advice giving, right? But we try to like cloak our gentle suggestions, and ideas, which I really think you need to follow because they work for me as well-intentioned. But often it's really telling somebody what else to do. You know what you should do? If they come around and they drunk and they break the place up, you should call the police. Well, I may not want to call the police. I may not believe that calling the police would be the right solution for me. So you telling me what your limit situations are not the same as me figuring out for myself what the limit situations are. And what you might think is a little extreme and is a limit for me, like doesn't matter to me. Like I only sleep 3 hours a night, so who cares, about sleeping? And so, well, I do. This is important to me. So again, like everything that we do, so individual, client-centered, customized, and relevant to the person that we're talking with regard to the limits. Okay, so now I know what my limit situations are and my non-negotiables, but you don't know yet, right? Particularly because I've probably had really porous, trample all over my petunias. I didn't care about it yesterday. Why should I care about it today? Like I haven't done a good job of communicating that. So I now know what my limit situations are. I need to communicate that to you. This is another minefield. Because when we're communicating to others, we often want to say, if you do that again, you need to, I'm telling somebody what the situation is, and then I'm telling them how they should behave. This is the good old serenity prayer right here, right? Serenity over all the people that I can't control, and the courage to change the one person that I can, which is me. And so I decide that I identify very specifically what the behavior is that's no longer okay for me. And then I say, I will. So what action will I take? Because you can't stop me from taking an action that I choose in order to protect my one wild and precious life to be lived to its full potential. I can decide what that action will be, and I alone am responsible for taking that action, right? So I go from being a victim to being responsible for my life. And I recognize that I need to take the action, right? So if you scream and shout and start breaking the furniture, I will take the children and I will stay with my mother. Right. I will, if you are planning to drink at the family get together, I will take my own car so that I can leave when I'm comfortable, if I need to, if things get uncomfortable for me. I decide what action I will take in any given situation. All right. So I assert my needs so that somebody else understands very specifically what situation is not okay for me and what action I plan to take in relation to that situation. I need to defend my boundaries, right? Because I need to recognize, again, the fence, the lovely neighbors, chatting, having a barbecue, right? It's all about let's have good relations between us. You have needs, I have needs, right? I don't have to aggressively make sure my needs override yours. I don't need to be passive that your needs can override mine. We find that happy place in the middle where we can both be assertive about what it is that we need. right? And we can defend those boundaries as we coexist together with each other. Listen to your instincts. I was about to jump back and say, but you've got to listen to your instincts. But anyway, that's the next little signpost on our roadmap here, is listen to your instincts. So I might have said to you, if you are planning to drink at the Thanksgiving dinner, I will take a car so that I can leave. Or if, Uncle Bob's going to be there and, that situation's not tenable for me, whatever it may be. And now when we want to go to the next situation, I'm supposed to take the car and whatever. And I go, no, I maintain all these social situations. If I feel I'm going to be if you are planning to drink, I didn't just say that about Thanksgiving. I am meaning that for all our social engagements. When we go to your brother's birthday party now or so on, like I need to listen to my instincts that, perhaps I'm being manipulated, or somebody go, but that's not what you meant. You meant just for this situation. And I'm going, no, I mean that for this situation too. Because that's the same idea, and these boundaries will be tested. I need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, to recognize that what you might be doing is not okay with me, or that you're trying to manipulate the situation. And so I need to be constantly aligning and communicating with what situations are not okay for me, and what actions I am prepared to take in order to have some responsibility, right, for the climate around me. All right. So we maintain these boundaries, and we maintain them. And honestly, maintaining boundaries is a lot about getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. We do move from this position where we go, oh, this person might just completely fly off the handle, if I tell them this, and be really angry with me. I don't have any control over that. This person may go out and make bad decisions, as a result of me deciding that I'm going to lock them out, after a certain time, because I'm going to bed and I need the house to be safe, and so on. I need to be able to, and that's why there's a lot of work around mindfulness and recognizing and self-compassion. This is hard. I feel so frightened. I feel so worried. I can be mindful. I can watch that. I can see that I feel that way. And I can wish that the situation was different. I can have some compassion over the person who's experiencing the situation as I watch myself go through this, and I can find supports. I can do what I need to do to maintain the boundaries, like against even my own internal triggers of discomfort at this new behavior, right? So again, just very quickly summarizing, I have a right to living my life, in the best possible way that I know how. I need to look at my emotions. I need to, recognize, is there stuff going on with me? Maybe sometimes it is about me. And I've developed some wonky beliefs here that maybe I should just look into and just check that I'm being rational with myself with regard to this limit. Once I know what I know what I need to set a limit around. I communicate that to you so that you're aware of it. And then need to defend those boundaries. I need to be consistent, right? We said boundaries that are just porous and loose and change all the time are kind of, I think, in some ways worse than no boundaries at all, because they just keep changing and they're unpredictable. We learn that too when we raise our kids, that the inconsistency around rules, that don't stick and so on is very difficult on people. I defend those boundaries. I listen to my instincts so that I can maintain those boundaries. And I am doing all this work because I want to maintain a relationship with somebody, right? Otherwise, I walk away, right? Eckhart Tolle says to us, there are only three things we can do in any given situation: accept the situation, change the situation, or leave the situation. Right? So the fact that I am trying to work on these boundaries with you is because the relationship is so valuable to me. And I want to be present. I want to support you. It's okay to do that. Is that codependent or is that pro-dependent? Right? Is we don't live in isolation in this world. We do care about our loved ones. And we are trying to figure out how we can make decisions about wanting to wish the best for them, wanting to support them while taking care of ourselves, and while being realistic about what we can control and what we can't. All right. So I'm just going to come back again to summarizing this idea of all of this work. You know, we talk about mindfulness and compassion, and we kind of throw it around. But this again with Kristen Neff, where she summarizes self-compassion so nicely as this idea of the two-winged bird, right? The mindfulness being the focus on the experience itself and allowing complete acceptance of what is and what is going on. You know, resistance to what is futile because it's what's happening. And so I start attending to that, right? But I attend to that in a way that I am truly paying attention, right? We undo that evolutionary negativity bias that she talks about, right? Where maybe I'm catastrophizing and so on. And I start to be really mindful about what's going on. But I want to do that because I'm seeking clarity, right, around the situation. When I focus with kindness, I am looking at the focus is on the experiencer of the experience. And I need to do that with some kindness, right? To appreciate how difficult it is to be sitting in that situation, how much I long for it to be different. So it's befriending the experiencer. It's to really, really bring this sense of, you're trying your best here. You know, if you knew a better way to do this, you would do it. You know, you're struggling to understand this just the same as everyone else. And man, oh man, it really hurts, and it really sucks to be in this situation. And we start to speak to ourselves with more kindness because we have to also undo what she refers to as the trance of unworthiness. We need to begin to fix and mend the relationship that we have with ourselves. A really great expression that I've heard before is this idea that I can't have a relationship with anybody else that's any better than the one I have with myself. And that I have found to be true, right? Is because a relationship that I have with you, I'm 50% of the equation. And if I believe that I'm a really worthless sack of shit, excuse my language, that's what I believe I'm bringing to the combination of the magic between us, right? Of what we both have to offer each other. I have to begin by befriending myself. Appreciating myself, validating myself, recognizing that the efforts I make are born of good intention for those that I love. And also, you know, as she always points out as well, this idea of connectedness, right? Common humanity, this idea that I'm not alone in the struggle. The reason that our community supports work so well in our lives, that they are essential for people in recovery. I don't care if it's Al-Anon or AA or NA or Smart Recovery or Refuge Recovery, or I don't care. But it's this idea that I go and I connect together with other people that are in the same boat, those that have shared in a common peril, right? And have reached that point where we are as desperate as only the drowning can be, as willing to listen as only the dying can be, right? That we are prepared to seek help, to share our stories, to let some wisdom in, to try a different way of doing things. And so when we do that, this idea too means that we go from being not as wholly self-centered to being, our sense of self expands. It's like a wave realizing that it's not separate from the ocean, right? It's like it's part of the ocean. It's our connectedness to all things. And we remember that. And we learn that when we seek out others who are in a similar position. Very important in recovery. Okay, I am at the end of my presentation. I'm afraid I haven't left that much time for questions, but we do have some time. I will share this presentation wherever I'm supposed to do that in the resources tab. But you know, some of the books here that I've referred to are listed, and also just some websites as well that are helpful for family members. So I'll hand it over now for questions. I will stop my share, or I can just stay on that slide if people need my contact information. Do I have somebody helping me facilitate questions, or do I jump to try to find them in the chat?
So if everyone could please raise their hand if you'd like to talk to the speaker. And if you can't get a hold of them, you can message me, Abigail Reed, and I'll help you out there. Okay, Colette?
All right, perfect. Thank you so much. Takes a village, eh?
Yes.
I can't see all the pages at once, so maybe just be daring and shout it out if you have a question, and then I can jump in with the answer, and I'll see if I can pull up the chat as well.
Dennis, do you have a question?
Yeah, not so much a question, just Colette, thank you for, I'm a believer in Christian Neff. I met her personally, and she's a wonderful person. I met her when I went down to, the term vulnerability always brings forth Brene Brown now for me. So she's a wonderful person too, hey? But I've got another book, it's called Mindful Relationships. And the book starts out, it says, the need to be intimate with yourself, to be mindful with yourself. And then when you know what your needs are and who you are and what you extend that, it makes it easier to be compassionate and extend that to other people. And if they don't accept it, then you've already set your boundary.
There you go. There you go. Beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm such a big fan, since really learning so much about self-compassion from Kristen. I'd love to be at one of her seminars as well one day. Yeah. And that idea that it is our relationship with ourselves, right? We have to be able to treat ourselves that way. If we recognize that those values, I love the grounding values as well that Krista Tippett talks about, as we engage with standing in our power and what we know, but being open, right, to another's perspective.
Well, just, I'm not being critical. It's just, I don't know how we can be too rigid with our boundaries.
Yes.
I think if once they're set and we're comfortable with them, we should never question them, because that's part of our flexibility. We've worked hard to establish them. And if we start to question our flexibility, question the boundary we set, and we're only opening ourselves up for more codependency.
Yeah. Thanks, Dennis. I'm glad you raised that, because, when we go, they can, rigid boundaries are tough too. On the one hand, we talk about, we do so much hard work to get to the place where we know what the boundary is and we're prepared to defend it, and to be able to stick to itness about this is important for me. And if I can't value my own life and my own needs, how can I respect yours? I can't even respect my own. So we defend those boundaries. And yet when we talk about this idea of being in relation with others, and also wanting to take their needs into account, are there perhaps circumstances? But again, it's not easy, because we have to do that work of checking in. Is it just because I'm too uncomfortable, and to say no, or am I being manipulated in a way that I'm being sold a bill of goods, that this situation's different? In this situation, I should let you get away with something that's not okay with me. So I need to constantly look at, what are my thoughts around this? And usually it's like when I'm having that emotional response, I'm feeling some anxiety around that. Why? What's going on? What's fueling that anxiety? What are the thoughts behind that anxiety? I'm so scared that if I say no, and this event is 2 days away, and everything's just going to blow up, and is that true? Is it true that I have to capitulate just because of, so I really have to find out what thoughts are driving uncomfortable feelings. And it's not easy, right? Like most things, it's simple. It's like the 12-step model. It's simple, but it's not necessarily easy, to change. to do things a different way, to live with discomfort, to feel some sympathy for myself, that this is hard, this sucks.
Cheryl has a question about compassion to her peers. I don't know, Cheryl, if you'd like to elaborate on that for us. Maybe not. That's
No?
all right.
I'm
Holly
scanning
seems
through just to see if there are any other questions here. Yeah, somebody's mentioning the primal wound, our issues around self-esteem. Yeah. Yeah, I just think there's a lot of agreement here in, recognizing that this idea of living this well-rounded, loving, fulfilling life is all about connecting with others, and respecting that interrelatedness and the complexity around that, these civilizational and intimate questions that arise about how do we contend with that, how do we deal with changing, and it isn't easy, and it takes time, and these habits die hard, right? Yeah, but it sounds to me that everybody is very much in agreement with the idea that we need to take care of ourselves before we can kind of figure out how to do that dance with others in our lives, in ways at least that we are mindful about, and doing it with the support of community, so that we recognize our common humanity, as Kristen says, and realize that it's important, it's hard, and we do it with the support of others. I always feel like, don't leave me alone in a room with just this guy, right? Like all this software and programming and so on, that this idea of just surrendering to something bigger than ourselves. When I surrender, when I do mindful work, I really recognize that I'm sitting quietly and I'm learning to watch my mind, like as we say, notice, become the sky, and your thoughts are clouds passing by. Some are thunderstorm, like cumulonimbus gathering, and so on. And yet they're my thoughts, right? They pass by, and I am the sky. And so as I start to recognize my thoughts, my emotions, the situations, I get curious about who it is that's observing. I identify with the observer. That's a higher consciousness than what is available to me, the limits of my human capabilities, my mental constructs that have been pieced together over time. They will take me to so far. And then I kind of remember to tap into this vastness bigger than myself. Yeah. Okay, so I think that might be, unless anybody has any questions.
Hello, how are you? Can you hear me?
Yes, hi, Don.
I think we're setting boundaries, our own personal boundaries. We have work boundaries, professional boundaries, and we've got that all in place. I think we're missing the key core is our moral values.
Right.
So if I sometimes get my moral values confused with my boundaries. You know what I'm saying? Like, you've crossed that boundary. Now what do I do about it? That's the thing I seem to have a difficulty with. How do once you crossed it, do I just, you're done, or you know what I'm talking about? Are we flexible? Can we be flexible with a boundary? That's a difficult thing. People can play games with, especially clients, with counselors. You can see right through it. And you just like to tell them, okay, You're getting close. Oh,
You
It's
know, when you
interesting.
talk about values, that's something so dear to my heart. And I do think that we set our boundaries based on our values, right? Like Albert Bandura, when he talks about self-efficacy, he's saying self-efficacy has two components, right? Is knowing what's important to me, my values, and B, believing that I can achieve it. Where I need to get sometimes tools and support, and so on to believe it's possible for me to, I've never done that before, that I can set these boundaries. Like, how do I have to begin with knowing what's important to me. And then how do I get the strength from within myself and the resources from those around me to align myself accordingly? Really, again, I suppose referencing the 12-step model is Jung was looking at this idea of recovery and what it was about. And he said it's not just abstinence, and it's certainly not religion, he was saying to Roland. When Roland went, well, I go to church, is that good news? Jung was saying to him, people that have this condition, to the extent that you do, I've seldom seen them be able to sustain it over the long term unless they have this idea of a spiritual awakening. And really what he was talking about was this realignment of values, beliefs, meaning, purpose. That often I can take a lot of my strengths and who I am in this world, but I need to point it to a greater purpose. And so when we look at this work, steps 6 and 7 are really where the money is, because it's saying I have to be prepared to be transformed according to the defects that I live by. And again, if I'm going to rely on my mind, I'm going to get my own personality to fix my personality. It's going to be the same, idea of about who's the person I'm putting in charge again. Can I surrender that to a higher consciousness than what I've got programmed in here right now? That's what he's asking. So that higher consciousness, I think, will automatically align to those higher ideals. And again, we see that common humanity, it's like Buddha asked what his religion is like very simply loving kindness. That when we are attuned to that higher consciousness and purpose and sense of what do I value in myself, in others, and in this world, that we are able to set those boundaries. So I think values are really our values are our guide. Yeah.
If I ever need a counselor, I'm going to get you.
Oh.
You were right on what I was thinking. 12 steps, more about values, where I go with my boundaries. You're right on exactly what I was thinking.
That's great.
That's amazing. It's almost like you're reading my mind. Scary.
Good.
But there we go.
I can't profess to having done that, but and I think a lot of the therapeutic interventions that we have, or like I work as a SMART facilitator too, because I really do believe in the power of cognitive behavior. It's free cognitive behavior therapy. I always say to the clients, where you can just practice skills where you can challenge your thought processes. So I think there's two things to be done in recovery. I always say to clients, don't choose between the models. Like, the one is saying, hey, clean up the software, a lot of bugs in there. Like, why wouldn't we? Why wouldn't we clean up the software? And then maybe sometimes you got to hand that over to something bigger than itself altogether, because this can only take you to that sort of it'll lead you to the edge of this unbelievable power that you have access to once you align with something bigger than your own limited human capabilities, as marvelous as they are. Yeah. I think I'm out of time, though. So, yes.
Yeah, we'll wrap this session up and let people get on and have a moment, maybe do some networking, and we'll have this recorded and shared to everyone following the conclusion of the conference. Thank you so much, Colette.
Oh, such a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Bye.
Bye.